Chapter 19. Some practical suggestions. In one of the American states, a law still exists making it illegal for a husband to kiss his wife on a Sunday. Of course, no one pays the slightest attention because the law is not and cannot be enforced, and because it only involves the parties concerned. It is a very different matter with laws involving huge commercial interests. A kiss is not a manufacturable commodity. Serums and radium plants are, and that is the trouble. To the pure in heart, which means the unselfish, altruistic, and uncommercially minded, it seems doubtless a curious irony that the treatment of certain said to be incurable diseases has become illegal except at the hands of those who cannot cure them. This is ostensibly to protect the public. Yet the logician may ask, to protect the public from what or from whom? We presume from such persons as fraudulently profess to cure what they know perfectly well that they are unable to cure, and who merely trade on the innocence and ignorance of the unwary. Well, such a law has its advantages, but it also has its drawbacks. Besides, it would be more convincing if the usual measures adopted by the medical profession, who agitated so that the laws should be passed, were 1. Instrumental in saving the lives of those it professed to protect, and 2. Those measures were not of so highly a lucrative nature. Operations for cancer are more costly to the patient than a few relatively harmless herbs sold by quacks, some of which have been known to do good. And a radium plant is a costly affair for the purchasers and very profitable to its vendors, as also is radium itself. Many doctors, as we have seen, of both the allopathic and homeopathic schools have warned their confreres of the unsatisfactory results obtained both by surgery and radium, but without any appreciable effect, for the something or operative treatment is still boosted as the correct treatment for malignancy. All the same, doctors sometimes find themselves in a quandary and have been known to turn to the unorthodox when it is a question of saving a relative. Dr. W. H. Roberts, the homeopath, wrote that an allopathic surgeon in the RAMC, Royal Association, I'm not sure, once called to see him about his sister, aged 47, who was suffering from a breast tumour for which she could not be treated, as advised by a leading Dublin surgeon, owing to the fact she was suffering from heart disease. Dr. Roberts' caller added, "I know nothing about homeopathy, but you are at liberty to try your remedies." The final upshot was that Dr. R. cured the lady. There was no recurrence, and she lived for 17 years and finally died of some illness of the influenza type. See Health Through Homeopathy, July 1944. Homeopathic literature relates of many cures of cancer, some more speedy than others, and whether one agrees with the homeopathic methods or not, at least the patient avoids the risk of having to suffer the after effects so often associated with radium treatment, surgery, or both. Fortunately, however, some doctors are so discouraged and depressed by the transient and painful results of these treatments that they are willing to try other methods in the interests of their patients. And it is just to these doctors that I address myself as WCDL, as to sufferers. Not sure what the original text would have been. And it is just to these doctors that I addressed myself, as well as to sufferers who I have every good reason to believe could greatly benefit by the treatment described in this book. After all, things have not come to quite such a pass. Though I shall have something to say about medical autocracy in my final chapter, that a qualified doctor is forced by law to employ the precise treatment the medical powers may advertise as the best. Nor can the law compel the citizen to be operated upon or be burnt with radium against his will. But as Dr. Beddoe Bailey and other physicians of varied schools have pointed out, how can members of the public demand a different form of treatment unless they know such treatments exist? When the medical profession advocates and boosts certain measures, as at one time it advocated bleeding for every imaginable disease, little mention is made of the many failures and often fatal results, and it is only when the public finally gets to hear of these through the bitter experiences of the victims that a demand is made for something better. Sometimes a doctor will admit the superiority of a treatment but abstain from using it, as witnessed the confession of a certain doctor relative to biochemistry, of which in a coroner's court he said, quote, "Biochemistry is the most logical and up-to-date method of treating disease. But we doctors are exceedingly conservative, and we shall stick to the old way until compelled by circumstances," unquote, obviously meeting the demands of the public, to adopt the newer and better system of medication, quoted by J.T. Heselton in Heal Thyself, July 1937. In view of all this, we are constrained to ask the questions mooted by C. Fraser Mackenzie, CIE, vis-a-vis, is the medical profession for the welfare of the nation, or are the citizens for the benefit of the doctors? Unquote. The answer goes on to say, quote, is in favor of the nation, provided doctors are generously treated, unquote. Quite so, and I for one am the last to wish that doctors should not be fairly treated, even though I was compelled to cure myself with my own methods in the end. But as matters stand at the moment, it nonetheless looks very much different if the patients existed for the benefit of the doctors. Indeed, it would hardly do to ask how many patients have died while physicians have been preoccupied with medical etiquette. However, that need not detain us. The question is how to deal with a problem which confronts the sufferer who has ceased to believe in orthodox methods and is prepared to try urine therapy. Should he dispense with doctor's services or should he not? From nearly every point of view, I consider it would be better if he did dispense with the services of his medical advisor. There is no practical reason whatever why the discovery, or rather rediscovery, of urine therapy should deprive the doctor of his bread, though that is a matter which rests entirely with the individual doctor. This book places him in possession of the facts, and should he refuse when requested by a patient to supervise a urine fast, then I can hardly be blamed for what is not my fault. It will not be the first time that a patient has suggested to his physician the particular treatment he wishes to try, and if spectacularly beneficial results accrue therefrom, then all the better for the doctor's reputation. Moreover, a doctor can act as a buffer between the well-intentioned but obstructive and tiresome interferences of anxious, but often quite prejudiced and ignorant relatives, who not only fear the worst, but fear the formalities and publicity of an inquest as well. All the same, I must sound a note of warning. If a doctor thinks he can combine drugs with the urine fast, despite my affirmations to the contrary, the suit will be failure. As we have seen, urine therapy is a nature cure in the most literal sense of the word, and to employ measures which are contrary to nature at the same time would not only be quite illogical but even dangerous. I know this to my cost, not as the result of this interfering with nature myself, but as the result of others doing so when my back was turned. Therefore I give this warning and sincerely hope it may be heeded. Provided it's heeded, I again repeat that the supervision of a doctor is desirable from many points of view, nor need the doctor feel any compunction in the matter, nor any slight to his dignity merely because this form of therapy was the outcome of a layman's experiments. Any physician who knows his medical history also knows that laymen have contributed much to the faculty of medicine. Even the adulated Pasteur, who, quote, did more to commercialize medicine than any other man, unquote, was not a doctor but merely a chemist. I may also mention hydropathy, and the fact that doctors do not necessarily consider it, again, infra followed by a space followed by dig, consider it infringing to be associated with to be associated with hydropathic establishments. This being the case, I am optimistic enough to think that in the not too distant future there may be establishments where patients can be treated with urine therapy and where there will be a staff of nurses to look after them and do the urine rubbings. Why should people be destined to die of gangrene and others said to be incurable conditions when it is possible to save them? Although urine therapy can never be unfavourable to the employment of labour, any more than hydropathy has been in the past, there is also sanitation, which as A.R. Werland points out, was introduced by laymen in the teeth of the passionate hostility of the medical profession, which thought its interests threatened. Yet certainly sanitation has not been hostile to labour, and doctors themselves are now as much in favour of proper hygiene as at one time they were against it. As a matter of fact, all reforms and changes threaten someone's interests, but in the end matters adjust themselves. Yet, when all is said, it is right that vested interests should interfere with the physical well-being of the people. If I could honestly say that the various money-making gadgets that are now on the market were really means to lasting health instead of being just palliatives, often deceptive ones at that, I should be the last